Before we even begin, you need to hear this. Everything you know about a perfect life is about to shatter. What if the most humiliating moment of your career, being pushed face first into a 5-foot cake at a gala, was actually the foundation of a $500 million master plan? The air in the ballroom of the Metropolitan Club was thick with the scent of aged champagne and unforgiving ambition. Elias Vance, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that now felt like a costume, stood near the colossal 3-tiered anniversary cake, a monument to Sterling Ventures' latest acquisition. He was a ghost at his own funeral, and he knew it. 2 years had passed since Robert Sterling, the man who once called Elias a mentor, had engineered the hostile takeover of Vance Global, stripping Elias of his company, his reputation, and his $500 million net worth. Elias had been invited to this gala, a cruel gesture of victory by Sterling. He was standing alone, nursing a glass of water, when the applause suddenly roared. Sterling, a man whose smile always looked like a shark's, walked toward him. He wasn't walking to shake hands. Elias. "So glad you could make it," Sterling boomed, his voice carrying effortlessly over the string quartet. He clapped Elias on the shoulder, a little too hard. "You know, seeing you here reminds me of something." Elias felt the familiar cold knot in his stomach. He braced himself, but no preparation could handle what came next. Sterling suddenly put both hands on Elias's chest, a look of mock panic on his face. "Oh, careful, Elias. You look like you're about to fall," Sterling sneered, and with a vicious, sudden shove, Elias stumbled. His hands flailed, and the world seemed to slow down. The next sound was the collective gasp of 200 of the city's elite, followed by the wet, sickening crash of a man hitting confectionery. Elias Vance, the man who had built an empire on integrity, was face down in a mountain of vanilla buttercream and raspberry jam. The crowd froze for one painful second. Then the laughter began. It started as nervous titters, but quickly became a tidal wave of cruel, unmasked hilarity. Sterling stood over him, tears of laughter streaming down his face. "Clean up on aisle Vance, folks," he yelled. Elias pushed himself up, the cake mix clinging to his hair, his jacket, even his eyelashes. He tasted sugar and felt only ash. As he wiped the creamy icing from his eyes, he looked straight at Sterling. Sterling laughed. Everyone laughed. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought they had seen a defeated man, but in the thick, sweet silence that followed, Elias didn't look defeated. He looked surgical. He straightened his tie, a small, absurd gesture, and his eyes, stripped of the last vestiges of dignity, now held only one thing: a plan. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply turned his back on the laughter and walked out, leaving the sound of their merriment echoing in his ears. The laughter, Elias discovered, was far more corrosive than the cake. The video of the incident went viral by dawn, captioned with callous hashtags like "Cakeboss fails" and "Vance goes down." The humiliation wasn't just personal. It became a global spectacle, an internet meme that mocked his entire existence. Within a week, the fallout began. Sarah Vance, his wife, called him from their beach house in Nantucket, a property she was quick to remind him was solely in her name. "Elias, you've made us a laughingstock," she stated, her voice cold and flat, void of any empathy or concern for him. "The children are being teased. I simply cannot associate with this disgrace." She demanded an immediate separation, sealing his financial ruin with a lawyer's practice detachment. The narrative was simple. The brilliant man who had built everything on logic was now an unstable pariah, pushed into a corner by his own failings and a very public mental snap. Elias didn't fight her. He simply signed the papers. He had no home, no company, and now no family to speak of. All that remained was a small, rented apartment in a rundown corner of the city, a place he chose precisely because no one who mattered to Sterling would ever look there. He sat on a folding chair in his empty living room. His world, once measured in quarterly reports and private jet routes, was now confined to 4 peeling walls and the persistent hum of the city traffic outside. He looked at his hands, once symbols of power and decision, now scarred only by the memory of cold glass and sticky frosting. His revenge plan, born in the heat of that moment, required more than just anger. It required obscurity. Sterling thrived on attention. Elias would use the cloak of invisibility. For the next 6 months, Elias vanished. He took a job stocking shelves at a massive, impersonal warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He rode the bus, ate $5 meals, and slept hard, dreamless nights. He became an everyday hero, lost among millions, finding a strange kind of peace in the anonymity. But every night, after his shift, Elias didn't rest. He opened the battered laptop he bought from a pawn shop. He wasn't looking at stock charts. He was looking at people. He was meticulously detailing the lives of the workers in the warehouse, the drivers on the bus, the single mothers, and struggling students. He realized that the system that failed him also crushed these small lives every day. And he knew that Sterling's empire was built on exploiting the cracks in that system. The revenge wouldn't be about just taking back money. It would be about justice engagement point. The humiliation was complete. Career, family, dignity, all gone in a flash. But the plan was born in that same moment. What do you think Elias's secret plan is right now? Is it to get his money back, or is it something bigger? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The warehouse floor was vast and cold, a kingdom of cardboard boxes and concrete. This was where Elias Vance, the former tycoon, spent his days loading trucks, his mind working the complex calculus of his slow-burn destruction of Robert Sterling. His hands ached, but his mind was sharper than it had ever been. He was no longer thinking about billions. He was thinking about leverage and vulnerability. His target, Sterling's new massive project, a multi-billion-dollar government contract known as Project Titan, a contract built on layers of subcontracting and financial opacity, exactly the kind of complex web that could hide a fatal flaw. Elias had one advantage. He knew the people, one person in particular, Manuel Flores, a 65-year-old forklift operator, quiet, dedicated, and working 2 jobs to pay for his granddaughter's college tuition. Manuel was an everyday hero with an encyclopedic knowledge of the logistics and shipping routes tied to a key Project Titan supplier. Elias started by simply observing Manuel. He saw the pride in his worn hands, the meticulous way he checked every manifest. He saw the worry etched around his eyes. One day, during a quiet lunch break, Elias approached him, not as a former CEO, but as a fellow worker. "Manuel, I noticed you rejected that last shipment of steel beams," Elias said, stirring his instant coffee. "Said the alloy composition was off." Manuel looked up, surprised that the new guy had noticed. "They pay me to check, son." Sterling's people cut corners. That batch was $2 a unit cheaper, but it had rust out in a year. The documents lie, but the metal doesn't. This small exchange was the seed of the entire plan. Sterling was cheating on the materials, not just the money. Elias realized the real weakness wasn't a financial loophole. It was poor quality control hidden by massive scale, a public safety time bomb. Elias began spending his evenings cross-referencing global shipping manifests, using his decades of high-level industry access, the few digital crumbs he still held, to trace the components of Project Titan back to their origin. He didn't hack anything. He simply applied a CEO's strategic vision to an ordinary worker's data. He found it, a pattern of consistently substandard materials being flagged by small, honest workers like Manuel, but ignored by Sterling's mid-level managers who were incentivized by cutting costs. It was a massive structural fraud, hidden in plain sight. The cake had been a humiliation. This, however, was proof that Sterling wasn't just a corporate rival. He was a criminal willing to risk public safety for profit. Elias held the beginning of the end in his hands. He smiled for the first time in months. The plan was no longer about personal revenge. It was about public accountability. If you've stayed with us through Elias's darkest days and his rediscovery as a simple worker, thank you. You have stuck with the story because you know, just like we do, that the triumph stories always deliver. We promise you, the best part of this inspiring comeback is still to come. The first pieces of his $500 million secret plan are in place, and the next chapter is where Elias takes the first calculated step from obscurity back into Sterling's world. Don't go anywhere. You won't believe what he does next. The next 3 weeks saw Elias Vance completely transform. He wasn't just stocking shelves. He was mapping the enemy's logistics. Every late-night shift, fueled by stale coffee and a burning resolve, he became the cartographer of Robert Sterling's cracks. The system, built on speed and cheapness, left massive structural flaws, and Elias saw them all. His daily routine was a masterclass in duality. By day, he was Eli, a dependable warehouse worker who smelled faintly of cardboard dust. By night, he was the former Titan, meticulously piecing together the financial and physical weak points of Project Titan. He utilized a network of old, defunct industry forums and encrypted chat rooms, digital spaces Sterling would never condescend to check, to gather low-level intelligence. He needed proof that transcended a few rusty beams. He needed a witness, and the most valuable witness was often the most overlooked. This led him back to Manuel Flores. Elias knew better than to just ask. He approached Manuel with an act of genuine respect. One rainy Tuesday, Manuel's ancient pickup truck wouldn't start. Elias, using the basic mechanic skills he'd picked up in his youth, spent 2 hours in the downpour fixing the alternator. "You didn't have to do that." "Eli," Manuel said, shaking Elias's hand. His eyes filled with gratitude. "We look out for each other, Manuel." "That's how the real world works," Elias replied simply. The act of kindness opened the door. Over the next few days, Manuel started to trust Eli. He shared stories of management ignoring safety protocols, of forged inspection reports, and of the fear of speaking up. He revealed a digital ledger he secretly kept, documenting every single time a substandard component was waved through. This ledger, Manuel explained, was his insurance. He called it the Book of Lies. "They try to fire me. I send this to the press," Manuel muttered, tapping the hard drive. "But I can't. They threatened my granddaughter's college fund." Elias realized the true weight of Sterling's control. It wasn't just corruption. It was coercion. Sterling hadn't just ruined Elias. He was quietly crushing thousands of small, honest lives. Elias understood now that Manuel wouldn't be his witness. He would be his ally. But he needed protection first. Elias knew exactly where to find it. The next phase of his plan required him to leverage an asset he thought he'd lost forever: the law. Specifically, a single, sharp-witted attorney with a massive chip on her shoulder. Elias's target was attorney Clara Diaz, age 34. Clara was a public defender with a fierce reputation for championing the underdog, and a deeply personal animosity towards Sterling Ventures. Years ago, Sterling had used his corporate machine to crush her father's small, honest construction firm in a contract dispute, leaving the family financially devastated. Elias tracked her down to a bustling, no-frills office downtown. He walked in, still wearing his warehouse jacket, still smelling faintly of stale bread and hard work. Clara looked up from a stack of files, her expression guarded. "I'm here about Robert Sterling," Elias said, getting straight to the point. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Everyone is. If you're looking for cheap legal advice, the meter's running." Elias sat down, the folding chair creaking beneath him. "I'm not looking for advice. I'm offering him to you. The evidence you need to not just sue Sterling, but to expose a multi-billion-dollar structural fraud that jeopardizes public safety." "I know how he's cornered the market on Project Titan," Clara laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "And who are you exactly? A disgruntled ex-employee?" "Sterling has a line of those stretching around the block." Elias leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. "I'm Elias Vance, the man who was pushed into the cake, The name hit Clara like a physical shock. Her expression shifted from skepticism to sudden total focus. The disgraced CEO? The meme? The one who knows where Sterling buried the bodies? Elias corrected. He didn't mention the $500 million plan. He talked about Manuel, the rusty beams, the forged documents, and the vulnerability of the entire system. He gave her enough details to confirm his insider knowledge without revealing the whole strategy. Clara was a warrior for justice, not revenge. Elias knew the difference. I don't want money, Clara. I want justice for every worker Sterling has crushed. I want his empire dismantled piece by piece. But I need you to protect my sources, starting with a man named Manuel Flores. You protect him, and I will give you the weapon to dismantle the man who ruined both our families. Clara studied the man in front of her. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man forged in fire. She didn't trust his motives, but she recognized the truth in his eyes. The unlikely alliance was sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared enemy and a promise of justice. With Clara Diaz running interference, Elias secured a safe channel for communication and, most importantly, secured the Book of Lies, Manuel's digital ledger, under the protection of attorney-client privilege. Manuel was safe, and Elias now had the foundational evidence he needed. Elias had been living on the outskirts of the world. Now he needed to re-enter it, but with total control over his appearance. He used the last of his liquidation cash, a meager $15,000, not for a new suit, but for technology. He rented a secure, nondescript office space under a shell company, furnishing it with nothing but a custom-built computer rig. This office became his architect's desk, the headquarters of his $500 million secret plan. His work shifted from manual labor to intellectual labor. He spent days drawing massive organizational charts, mapping Sterling's empire not as a single entity, but as a parasitic organism feeding on dozens of sub-companies. He discovered that Sterling wasn't just corrupt. He was over-leveraged and careless. Sterling Ventures had grown too fast, relying on the guaranteed cash flow from Project Titan to cover massive speculative bets on the global market. The structural fraud wasn't just a moral failing. It was a financial time bomb. Elias's plan evolved from simply exposing the construction fraud into a two-pronged attack, the pincer move. Prong 1. Legal accountability. Clara would begin discreetly compiling the case using Manuel's data, building an airtight civil suit based on fraudulent contract performance and public risk. This would draw the attention of regulatory bodies, forcing an audit. Prong 2. Financial leverage. This was Elias's specialty, using complex financial derivatives and short-selling positions, small bets that could yield exponential returns. Elias would quietly begin to bet against Sterling Ventures' speculative assets. He wasn't just waiting for the empire to fall. He was creating the conditions for its collapse. He had $15,000 and a plan that required millions. It seemed impossible, but Elias wasn't intimidated. He knew that in high finance, a small, perfectly timed lever can move a mountain of debt. The narrative of his humiliation, the cake incident, had given him the invisibility he desperately needed. Sterling was still laughing, still celebrating his perceived victory, completely oblivious to the fact that the man he humiliated was now sitting at his architect's desk, drawing the blueprints for his empire's downfall. The true comeback wasn't about money. It was about precision, and Elias was about to become the most precise force Robert Sterling had ever encountered. Elias's $15,000 investment was a needle in Sterling's haystack, but it was a needle he knew how to sharpen. His strategy wasn't to buy stocks. It was to leverage obscurity. He started by investing in highly volatile but technically legitimate financial instruments tied directly to the vulnerabilities he'd identified. In Sterling Ventures' speculative portfolio, he used an array of anonymous offshore accounts, dormant shell corporations he had legally established years prior, for his legitimate business that now served as perfect camouflage. Sterling's analysts would see the transactions, but they would dismiss them as noise, as low-volume, high-risk trades from unknown entities. This was the genius of his invisibility. Nobody was looking for Elias Vance, certainly not in the shadows of the market. His first target was a large real estate fund in Dubai, a massive, overly ambitious sterling project, dependent on continuous high-risk cash flow. Elias didn't short the fund, which would be too obvious. Instead, he made precise small bets against the bond insurer of the fund. If the fund wobbled, the insurer would feel the immediate strain, a tremor that would go unnoticed by the media, but would register like a seismic event on Sterling's internal risk models. At the architect's desk, Elias tracked the data obsessively. The small investments began to yield disproportionately large returns. It was the financial equivalent of a tripwire. Within 2 weeks, his $15,000 had quietly ballooned to over $250,000. Not a fortune, but enough to escalate the attack. Meanwhile, Clara Diaz was meticulously building her civil suit. She needed one small public event to legitimize her case and force Sterling's hand. She found it in a seemingly insignificant story, a small, non-fatal collapse of a concrete wall at a low-income housing unit funded by Sterling Ventures, a project entirely separate from Project Titan. But using the same compromised supplier, Clara's approach was surgical. She didn't leak the information. She simply filed a notice of intent to sue, naming the small, vulnerable subcontractor, not Sterling Ventures directly. This was intentional. It was designed to force Sterling to either abandon his subcontractor, a sign of guilt, or fiercely defend them, thus attaching his corporate name to the poor quality control. The system was reacting. Slowly, cautiously, just as Elias had predicted. The ghost in the machine was making his presence known, but only to the algorithms and the hyper-vigilant risk managers who worked in the dark. Robert Sterling was still laughing, but somewhere in his corporate headquarters, a small red warning light had just flickered on, and nobody knew what it meant. Robert Sterling was a creature of habit. Every morning, he read the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, looking for headlines that celebrated his success. He rarely looked at the detailed risk reports from his financial analysts. That was for the subordinates. This arrogance was Elias's greatest asset. The small, quiet moves Elias made in the market were having their intended effect. The bond insurer he targeted experienced a sudden, unexpected liquidity crunch. They needed cash fast and started selling off assets tied to Sterling Ventures' riskier ventures. This caused a chain reaction, minor jitters in the energy sector, small spikes in borrowing costs for one of Sterling's private equity arms. These weren't disasters. They were tremors. Sterling's chief financial officer, Marcus Thorne, age 45, paranoid and hyper-competent, was the first to notice the pattern. He saw the unusual selling pressure, the strange, anonymous short positions, and the sudden, irrational nervousness around specific Sterling assets. It's not organic. Robert, Thorne insisted during a tense boardroom meeting, pushing a series of charts across the polished table. It's highly coordinated. Someone is methodically testing the weakest points of our portfolio. They're spending dimes to create dollars worth of panic. Sterling, reclining in his leather chair, dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Nonsense, Marcus. It's market volatility. You're paid to worry. Nobody can coordinate an attack against a fortress like Sterling Ventures. It's probably a hedge fund testing the waters. But the pattern is too specific, Thorne countered, rubbing his temples. It's as if someone has the master blueprint of our vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Elias was moving on to his second target, a logistics firm that Sterling had controversially taken over, shedding thousands of reliable union workers for cheaper, less experienced labor. This firm was essential to the timely delivery of Project Titan components. By targeting this company's small-cap stock, Elias created a localized but intense financial disturbance, signaling operational instability. His $250,000 was now close to $800,000. The money was irrelevant. The momentum was everything. Elias was successfully weaponizing information and anonymity. Sterling was still blind, searching for a hedge fund boogeyman, completely missing the warehouse worker who now had the power to destabilize his kingdom with a few keystrokes. The laughter from the cake incident was finally beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, low rumble of corporate anxiety. The humiliation was public, but the revenge is strictly confidential. Elias is systematically dismantling Sterling's empire from the inside, using small, calculated moves. If you were Elias right now, with only $800,000 and the truth on your side, what would your next financial move be to cause the biggest impact? Share your strategy in the comments. The legal and financial pressure points were now converging. Clara Diaz's notice of intent to sue the subcontractor finally made a ripple in the press, a tiny, single-column story in the back of the Metropolitan section. It was enough. The local news report focused on the minor wall collapse and the alleged use of substandard materials, framing it as a simple case of corporate negligence. This forced Sterling Ventures to issue a defensive, boilerplate statement denying any culpability and supporting their subcontractor, exactly what Elias and Clara wanted. By defending the small company, Sterling officially tied himself to their poor quality control. Elias watched the news clip from his architect's desk. He didn't feel triumph, only the cold satisfaction of precision. The humiliation of the cake had taught him that revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet and inevitable. His focus returned to the financial battlefield. His $800,000 had given him significant leverage. He initiated the third phase, targeting Sterling's overseas bond rating. He knew that the moment the bond rating dropped, Sterling's over-leveraged position on Project Titan would snap. To achieve this, he used his capital to purchase insurance against the failure of several key banks that provided Sterling's collateralized loans. The purchases were small, but when combined with the earlier tremors, they were enough to alarm the major rating agencies. These agencies didn't care about a newspaper story. They cared about systemic risk. The rating agency analysts began their due diligence, looking for the source of the market jitters. They found the strange, anonymous trading patterns and the sudden instability in Sterling's peripheral assets. They didn't find Elias Vance, but they found enough to justify a negative watch on Sterling Ventures bonds. The news of the negative watch was the first true slap in Robert Sterling's face since the cake incident. It was a formal public signal that the stability of his empire was in question. Sterling called an emergency board meeting, his smooth composure finally cracking. "Who is doing this?" He roared at Marcus Thorne, slamming his fist on the table. "Find the source. This has cost us $10 million in collateral fees overnight." Thorne was already looking. He had cross-referenced the unique trading patterns with a database of former rivals, disgruntled employees, and market predators. The list was a mile long, but there was one name at the bottom, crossed out long ago, that Thorne couldn't shake from his mind: Elias Vance. It was dismissed instantly. Vance was a broken man, a warehouse worker. But the methodical, strategic genius behind the attack felt hauntingly familiar. The former Titan was a ghost in the machine. But his work was now undeniable. Engagement point. We're diving deeper into the conspiracy. Elias has successfully triggered a market alarm and forced Sterling's hand in court. Thank you so much for staying with us through this incredible journey. Your commitment to the triumph stories fuels us to keep bringing these intense, real-life comebacks to light. Believe us when we say the corporate drama you've seen is nothing compared to the personal betrayal that is about to unfold. The next chapter brings Elias face to face with an unexpected enemy from his past. Don't go anywhere. The best is absolutely yet to come. Elias Vance was deep in the digital labyrinth of the market when the call came, an encrypted line from Clara Diaz. Her voice was sharp with urgency. "They're counter-attacking. Elias, not against the lawsuit yet, but against Manuel Flores," she stated. "Sterling's people found out he was the source. They didn't fire him. That would be too loud. They're making his life hell, cutting his hours, moving him to the worst routes, trying to push him to quit without severance. Elias felt a cold rage. This wasn't corporate warfare. It was petty cruelty directed at an everyday hero. We anticipated this. Is he safe? Physically, yes. Financially, he's scared. He's risking everything for us, for justice, and he's watching his granddaughter's college fund slip away, Clara said. We need a win, Elias, a tangible one. Soon. Elias realized his plan, brilliant in its financial complexity, was emotionally deficient. He was using people as pieces on a chessboard, forgetting the unseen costs of their courage. He had promised Manuel protection, and he needed to deliver. He had one major financial play left with his accumulated capital. A high-risk derivative purchase designed to expose the short-term cash liquidity issues within Sterling Ventures' main operations. If it worked, it would force a major financial restructuring. If it failed, his $800,000 would vanish. Elias stared at the screen, the weight of Manuel's struggle pressing down on him. This was the moment where integrity met strategy. He executed the trade. It was a massive short position that, if correct, would trigger a cascade of margin calls on Sterling's partners. He immediately dedicated $100,000 of his remaining capital to an anonymous scholarship fund for Manuel's granddaughter, ensuring her education was secure regardless of the outcome. Protection delivered. The market reacted almost immediately. The specialized derivative was a poison pill. Within 48 hours, Sterling Ventures had to publicly announce an internal accounting review, citing unexpected liquidity constraints. The stock price dropped a decisive 5%, the first noticeable scar on the face of the empire. Elias watched the news reports. He didn't see a successful trade. He saw Manuel Flores secure. This was the true nature of his comeback. Not to be a billionaire again, but to be a force for accountability. The man who was pushed into the cake was finally pushing back, not with anger, but with relentless, quiet precision. The anonymity that protected Elias was about to be challenged, however, by a ghost from his past. The internal accounting review at Sterling Ventures was a charade designed to calm the market, but it failed. The financial tremors continued. Sterling was desperate, turning the screws on every employee, looking for the phantom enemy who was meticulously chipping away at his fortress. It was during this time that Elias received an email sent to his old defunct personal address and forwarded by a diligent administrative service he still paid for. The subject line was simply, "I'm home. We need to talk." The sender was Elias Vance, age 23. Elias's daughter. Elias hadn't spoken to Olivia since the day after the cake incident, when she had called him, tearful and confused, asking why he had humiliated the family. Sarah, his ex-wife, had since poisoned the well, painting Elias as reckless, unstable, and the architect of their financial ruin. Olivia, studying abroad and highly dependent on her mother's new financial backing, had slowly drifted away. Elias hesitated. Contacting Olivia was a massive security risk. His life depended on his invisibility. But the pain of that estrangement, the one cost he hadn't fully accounted for, was unbearable. He couldn't risk the plan, but he couldn't lose his daughter forever. He chose a public meeting place, a busy, neutral coffee shop downtown, the only place where Sterling's spies couldn't easily corner him. Elias arrived first, his heart hammering in his chest, a stark contrast to the quiet calm he maintained at the architect's desk. Olivia walked in, and Elias barely recognized her. She was thinner, older around the eyes, carrying a weariness that belied her youth. She was dressed simply, not in the designer clothes she used to favor. She didn't hug him. She sat down, her hands folded tight on the table. "Mom told me you're working in a warehouse. That you're—" She struggled for the word. "Unraveling. I am working in a warehouse, Olivia." "But I am not unraveling," Elias said quietly, meeting her gaze. "I am rebuilding." She pulled out a crumpled, official-looking document. "I found this at Mom's new penthouse. It's a non-disclosure agreement. It says I can't talk about Robert Sterling or his company. She's working for him, Dad. Not directly, but a marketing firm she invested in is deeply embedded in Project Titan. Elias felt the air drain from the room. His ex-wife, who had abandoned him for disgrace, was now working for the very man who orchestrated that disgrace. The emotional toll of the revenge suddenly became acutely personal. The enemy was not just Sterling. The enemy was now intertwined with the last remnants of his family. The non-disclosure agreement, NDA, that Olivia held was the key to the new betrayal. Sarah Vance wasn't just working for Sterling, she was part of the problem. Her marketing firm was running the massive public relations campaign designed to keep the public and the rating agencies blind to the structural flaws of Project Titan. She was actively whitewashing the very corruption that was destroying Olivia. Now understanding the depth of the deception was visibly shaken. I asked her about it. She said you were jealous, that you were trying to hurt her new reputation. She said Sterling was a victim of your unstable behavior. Elias took the NDA and folded it neatly. He felt a profound sadness replacing the rage. Sarah wasn't a powerful villain. She was a victim of her own greed, easily manipulated by Sterling's promises of restored status. I didn't lose my family, Olivia, Elias said gently. I lost a woman who valued status more than truth. But I have you, if you choose to see the truth. Elias made a difficult decision. He showed Olivia a controlled, limited view of his architect's desk. The charts, the data, the meticulous documentation of Sterling's fraud, and the proof that his empire was a public safety risk. He didn't reveal the full $500 million plan, but he showed her enough to validate his sanity and integrity. Olivia looked at the complex data, the shipping manifests, the legal filings, and the picture of Manuel Flores. She saw not the disgraced meme, but the meticulous, strategic genius who was risking his freedom for justice. Her eyes welled up. "What do you need me to do, Dad?" she whispered. The second alliance was sealed, built on a foundation of family and a renewed sense of moral clarity. Olivia, as a student of communications and market trends, was perfectly positioned to counter her mother's PR narrative. She was Elias's mole inside the Sterling ecosystem, a source of vital, high-level information that no amount of hacking could provide. The emotional stakes were now impossibly high. Elias had moved beyond financial revenge. He was fighting a personal war to reclaim his name and his daughter's trust. The challenge of his inspiring comeback had been fully redefined. The next move had to be public, undeniable, and it had to target the one thing Robert Sterling held most dear, his public image. Olivia Vance became Elias's Trojan horse. Her access, though indirect, was invaluable. She spent weeks under the guise of trying to reconcile with her mother, Sarah, subtly gathering data on the Sterling Ventures public relations strategy. She learned where the weak points were, the specific journalists Sterling was attempting to co-opt, the internal talking points used to dismiss the negative watch, and, crucially, the schedule of Sterling's private, closed-door meetings. The core of Sarah's PR campaign was simple: discredit Elias Vance as a failed, bitter man exacting revenge. They intended to leak carefully curated details about Elias's past, spinning his strategic silence as a sign of mental instability following the humiliation. Elias, anticipating this, gave Olivia a counter-narrative. It wasn't a defense of himself, but a pivot to authenticity. He instructed her to subtly plant the idea among Sarah's team that the public would connect better with a story of a resilient man, a man who had found peace in manual labor rather than a vengeful one. This was a subtle but effective deflection, confusing Sterling's team about Elias's true intentions. "They're looking for anger, Liv," Elias told her during a quick, discreet call. "Give them the picture of resignation. Let them think I'm too broken to fight." Meanwhile, the legal front heated up. Clara Diaz, using the intelligence of the Internal Liquidity Review, Chapter 10, filed a motion demanding an independent safety audit of Project Titan. She framed it as a public service, using the small, localized concrete collapse as the precedent. The motion was denied, but it achieved its true purpose. It put the word audit into the public record, forcing Sterling to spend millions on defense and legal stonewalling. The pressure on Sterling Ventures was becoming immense, but it was all internal, financial tremors and legal headaches. Elias needed a visible public act that would validate his sacrifice and trigger the next phase of his $500 million secret plan. The time for invisibility was running out. He needed a stage, and Olivia had just provided the blueprint for that stage, a massive, televised charity event hosted by Sterling himself. The convergence point was the Sterling Annual Charity Gala. On a televised event where Robert Sterling would announce a massive donation to support underprivileged workers, a move designed to counteract the negative PR surrounding Manuel Flores and the logistics scandal. The irony was suffocating. Elias realized this was his opportunity. It was the perfect stage for his inspiring comeback because it would force a public confrontation on Sterling's home turf. Under the guise of philanthropy, the very virtue Sterling lacked, the complexity lay in getting access. Elias was blacklisted everywhere. He relied on the most overlooked ally, Manuel Flores. Manuel, through his union connections, was an invited guest. Sterling needed a few authentic workers for his photo ops, a PR move organized by Sarah's firm. Elias's plan was audacious. He would attend the gala as Manuel's +1, introduced simply as his former warehouse co-worker. He would be wearing borrowed, ill-fitting clothes, the costume of the everyday hero, the polar opposite of the tuxedo he wore during the cake incident. This time, he would control the visual narrative. Clara Diaz prepared the final documents, a concise, irrefutable summary of the Book of Lies, and a detailed report on the systemic fraud within Project Titan. It was a bomb, but it needed to be delivered publicly to ensure that Sterling couldn't simply bury it with a legal injunction. The stress on Elias was immense. He was walking directly back into the Lion's Den, the same ballroom where he was publicly destroyed. His hands were steady, but the memories were sharp, the sticky frosting, the roar of the laughter. This was the ultimate test of his resilience. If the plan failed, he risked not only prison time, but the complete moral ruin of Manuel and Olivia. But if it succeeded, the cataclysm would be total. The time for quiet sabotage was over. The secret plan was about to be revealed. The night of the gala was cold and electric. Elias, looking every inch the working man in a simple dark suit, walked into the Metropolitan Club on the arm of Manuel Flores. The difference from 2 years ago was staggering. Then he was a CEO, unnoticed. Tonight, he was an anomaly, a blue-collar man amidst a sea of black ties, and everyone stared. Robert Sterling, spotlessly tailored, was shaking hands near the stage, his smile a mask of forced warmth. He didn't recognize Elias. He looked through him, only seeing Manuel, his designated prop. "Welcome, Manuel." "So glad you could make it," Sterling boomed, shaking Manuel's hand and briefly nodding dismissively at Elias. "And you must be a friend." "This is Eli," Manuel said, a quiet pride in his voice. "He was my co-worker at the warehouse." Sterling's eyes flickered with a millisecond of recognition, a vague memory of the disgraced Vance, but the sight of the plain suit and the obvious low status instantly erased the connection. "Ah, splendid. Enjoy the shrimp, Eli, the best in the city." He turned away, the dismissive wave a mirror of the one he'd given at the board meeting. The humiliation was repeated, but this time it was by design. Elias moved through the room, collecting gazes and whispers. His presence was a subtle disruption, an uninvited truth among the lies. He made eye contact with his ex-wife, Sarah. Her composure snapped. She rushed over, pulling Elias aside with a furious whisper. "What are you doing here, Elias? Are you trying to ruin me again?" She hissed. "I'm here to support a friend, Sarah," Elias said, his voice calm and steady. "Something you've forgotten how to do. Your boss is about to step onto the stage and lie to the world. I'm here to ensure the truth is heard." Sterling was called to the stage. The lights dimmed, the cameras rolled. This was the climax of his PR campaign. He began his speech talking about integrity, community, and supporting the working class. The crowd applauded on cue. But in the back of the room, Elias Vance was no longer the uninvited guest. He was the conductor of the coming storm. The moment of his public confession, his definitive comeback, was now. Elias is back in the lion's den, and this time he's holding the match. He's disguised as an everyday hero, ready to confront the man who destroyed him. Robert Sterling is about to lie to the world on camera. What is the one thing Elias must say or show to not only ruin Sterling, but to finally reveal the full $500 million secret plan? Drop your predictions for Elias's final move in the comments. Robert Sterling, bathed in the soft glow of the stage lights, was reaching the crescendo of his speech. And so tonight, as we pledge these funds to uplift our working communities, we demonstrate that Sterling Ventures is not just about profit, but about integrity and accountability. The applause was deafening, a well-oiled machine of self-congratulation. It was Elias's cue. He had positioned himself near a side exit, within sight of the stage, but far enough away to avoid security's immediate intervention. He nodded almost imperceptibly at Manuel. As Sterling turned to step away from the podium, Manuel, with a courage born of pure desperation and trust in Elias, did the unthinkable. He walked onto the stage. The music faltered. Sterling's expression went from triumphant to murderous in a split second. "Manuel, what are you doing?" Sterling hissed, trying to pull him back. Manuel gently pushed Sterling's hand away. He took the microphone. His voice was shaky, but it carried the weight of every exploited worker. "Mr. Sterling talks about integrity. I want to talk about lies." The ballroom fell into a stunned silence. Sarah Vance, standing near the wings, paled, realizing the scale of the disaster. "I am a forklift operator," Manuel continued, his voice finding strength. "I risked my job, my granddaughter's college fund, because I saw safety protocols ignored. I saw cheaper, rusted materials used in construction. I saw forged inspection reports for Project Titan." Sterling lunged for the microphone. "This man is unstable. He's a disgruntled employee." But before Sterling could silence him, Elias Vance stepped out of the shadow. He walked purposefully calmly toward the stage. The camera, still rolling for the charity telecast, panned to this mysterious, plain-suited man. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He looked straight into the lens, his face now free of cake, free of shame. "He's not disgruntled, Robert. He's telling the truth, and I can prove it." Elias reached the stage, the crowd now buzzing with confusion and panic. Sterling finally recognized him, the face he thought was buried under debt and cream frosting. "Vance, security, get this lunatic out of here." Elias took the microphone from Manuel. The simple act felt like reclaiming his throne. "They laughed when he pushed me into the cake." Elias's voice was calm, cutting through the chaos. "But no one is laughing now that I've revealed my secret plan." With the cameras fixed on him, Elias Vance, the disgraced former CEO, didn't talk about revenge. He talked about data. "My secret plan was not to get my money back," Elias declared, the words echoing through the cavernous ballroom. "My plan was to expose the structural rot in Robert Sterling's empire, which is built on the exploitation of workers like Manuel and worse, on systemic fraud that risks public safety." He pulled out a slim, encrypted hard drive, the digital copy of Manuel's Book of Lies and Clara Diaz's compiled evidence, and held it up for the cameras. "This drive contains absolute, irrefutable proof, emails, shipping manifests, and financial records confirming that Sterling Ventures knowingly used substandard materials in all its contracts, including the government-funded Project Titan," Elias stated. "This isn't about profit, this is about lives. And this data has already been transmitted to every major regulatory agency and media outlet, ensuring that this story, Robert, cannot be buried. Sterling..." realizing the catastrophic scale of the revelation, lunged at Elias, but Manuel intercepted him, holding the heavier man back. The sheer shock of the audience was palpable. This was not drama. This was a live corporate execution. Elias continued, his voice ringing with authority. The 500 million I lost 2 years ago, that loss taught me where the real value lies, in the overlooked truth. My $500 million secret plan was simple. Use the small, hidden flaws you created, Robert, to legally collapse your entire house of cards. He explained the synchronized market moves, the liquidation crisis, the bond rating watch, the legal maneuvering, all coordinated from his anonymous architect's desk. He hadn't just sued. He had created the financial conditions for a total, systemic failure. Sterling Ventures was not only exposed as fraudulent, but was now facing immediate insolvency. The crowd of elite investors, recognizing the financial reality of the situation, began scrambling for their phones. The panic wasn't about the scandal. It was about the impending market crash of Sterling's stock. Sterling's face, contorted with hatred and panic, was the last image Elias needed. His financial world was crashing, live on television, with Sterling Ventures' future destroyed and the legal evidence publicly secured. The final, most personal piece of Elias's plan clicked into place, the reclaiming of his dignity, witnessed by his daughter, Elias Vance, watching from the press area, was weeping, not from sadness but from overwhelming pride. Her father was not the meme nor the loser. He was a hero of integrity. She was the one who finally broke through the security line. She reached the stage just as the first wave of genuine, non-Sterling security was moving in. She didn't hug him. She grabbed a towel from a nearby waiter and gently wiped a smudge of dirt from his plain suit jacket, the suit he bought from his warehouse earnings. It was a silent, powerful gesture that spoke volumes. Dignity restored. Elias looked at his daughter, the silent apology and renewed trust passing between them. He then turned his gaze one last time to his ex-wife, Sarah, who was being quickly ushered out by her distraught PR team. He didn't speak to her, but the message was clear. She chose the wrong side. Sterling, now being restrained by the genuine security, screamed one final desperate insult. "You're a fool, Vance. A pauper, you have nothing." Elias smiled, a genuine, profound smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "I have something you'll never own, Robert," Elias countered, placing a steady hand on Manuel's shoulder. "I have allies, and I have the truth." The cameras were still rolling as Elias, Manuel and Olivia walked off the stage, leaving Robert Sterling to face the ruin of his empire and the flashing lights of the police who were finally entering the ballroom. The man pushed into the cake had not only taken down a giant, but had done so while uplifting the everyday hero and reclaiming his family. The inspiring comeback was complete. The world finally knew the true meaning of the laughter that night. Engagement point. We just witnessed a live corporate takedown. Elias Vance not only reclaimed his fortune and his name, but exposed a massive safety fraud by standing up for the everyday hero, Manuel. This is the definition of a triumph story. If Elias's strategic patience and final move inspired you to fight your own battles, hit the like button now. The next chapters will dive into the aftermath, the trial, the reconstruction of Elias's life, and a shocking new opportunity. Subscribe to the Triumph Stories so you don't miss the ultimate conclusion of this 26-chapter saga. The next morning, the financial world awoke to a cataclysm. The news was no longer a segment on a charity gala. It was a global crisis. The televised on-stage confrontation had ensured maximum visibility. Sterling Ventures stock was suspended from trading. The rating agencies, already spooked by Elias's earlier moves, immediately downgraded the bonds to junk status. The company was placed into receivership, its massive debt suddenly untenable without the guarantee of Project Titan's revenue. Revenue now frozen due to the public safety audit. Robert Sterling was arrested that afternoon at his penthouse. The charges weren't related to the $500 million financial collapse, which was still a complex civil matter. They were related to the specific documentable charges of fraud and endangerment brought forward by Clara Diaz, using the Book of Lies and Manuel Flores' testimony. Elias's strategy of exposing the everyday hero exploitation had provided the perfect legal hammer. Elias Vance, however, was nowhere to be found by the media. He was back at his rented apartment, watching the news coverage with Olivia and Clara. They were exhausted, but the silence was golden. No laughter, no scorn, only the sober, intense analysis of the financial reporters confirming every element of his plan. The narrative had shifted entirely. Elias was no longer the humiliated joke. He was the strategic whistleblower, the man who sacrificed his identity for justice. The most shocking moment came from his ex-wife, Sarah. Her PR firm was immediately implicated in the cover-up. Its contracts terminated, its reputation destroyed. During a brief media scrum, Sarah, looking haggard, was asked about Elias. He was always brilliant, she stammered, the words forced and laced with regret. I chose the wrong kind of life. Her betrayal, once a painful scar, was now vindicated by her own public shame. Elias did not relish her downfall. He felt only a vast empty relief. The personal aspect of the revenge was less about Sarah's misery and more about the simple, undeniable confirmation that his integrity was real. The final piece of his secret plan, the inspiring comeback, was fully realized. He had not only won the money war, but had completely flipped the public narrative, proving that the man they laughed at was, in fact, the hero. The criminal case against Robert Sterling moved with shocking speed. The political pressure to prosecute was immense, given that the fraud involved government contracts and public safety. Sterling, confident in his legal team, initially refused to cooperate, maintaining his arrogant denial. Clara Diaz, now a national figure, became the face of the prosecution for the everyday heroes. She ensured that Manuel Flores' testimony was the central pillar of the case, representing not just financial crime, but a moral betrayal of the working class. Manuel, finally free of fear, gave an emotional statement about honesty and the importance of holding power accountable. The financial recovery, however, was complex. Elias's strategic short-selling, combined with the market collapse, meant the anonymous offshore accounts had yielded huge, multi-million-dollar gains, far more than the $500 million he originally lost. It was money gained through the legal and precise collapse of a corrupt system. Elias's biggest moral dilemma wasn't about the money, but about the future. His plan was complete, but his identity was still in question. He was still technically Eli, the warehouse worker, in the eyes of the law's most intrusive processes. He realized he needed to emerge fully, not as the vengeful figure, but as the rebuilder. He made the decision to publicly transfer the entirety of his sudden, massive gains, tens of millions of dollars, into a new, fully transparent trust fund. The fund was named the Triumph Foundation, dedicated to supporting whistleblowers, funding worker advocacy, and providing scholarships for the children of exploited workers like Manuel's granddaughter. This act cemented his motive. The money was never the goal. Justice was the dividend. The moment he revealed the foundation, the financial press erupted, finally confirming the sheer scale of his brilliance. The $500 million secret plan was never a cash grab. It was a complex act of altruism disguised as revenge. With Sterling facing a long prison sentence and his empire in ruins, Elias Vance had a clear path forward. He decided not to re-enter the cutthroat world of corporate finance. He had seen its cost. Instead, he, Clara, Manuel, and Olivia formed a strategic, powerful partnership, the Rebuilders. Clara Diaz took a position as chief counsel for the Triumph Foundation, using her legal firepower to continue battling corporate injustice. Manuel Flores became the foundation's director of worker advocacy, traveling the country to train workers on identifying and reporting fraud, his personal experience giving him profound credibility. Elias Vance joined as Director of Communications. She used her skills to reshape the narrative, sharing true stories of everyday heroes and transforming the foundation into a powerful voice for ethical capitalism, the very antithesis of her mother's failed PR firm. Elias himself became the foundation's quiet architect. He used his strategic genius to dismantle corruption, but now he was building systems to prevent it. He remained largely out of the spotlight, content in the background, mentoring the next generation of ethical leaders. His ultimate act of rebuilding was personal. He sold the tiny, cramped apartment, the headquarters of the architect's desk, and bought a modest, comfortable home, large enough for Manuel and his family to move in next door. A community, not an empire. One evening, sitting in his new, quiet office, Olivia brought him a cup of coffee. "You saved us, Dad," she said simply. Elias shook his head. "We saved us, Liv. The moment they laughed at me, I realized I had to build something that could never be taken away. Not wealth, but trust. And truth, the saga of the cake, the humiliation, and the $500 million secret plan was now a legend, a triumph story that proved that resilience, when paired with strategic integrity, is the ultimate form of power." Engagement point. The Triumph Foundation is born. Elias didn't take the money. He used his strategic millions to fight for the everyday heroes who backed his plan. What surprised you most about Elias's final selfless move? Did you expect him to keep the money, or was this the ultimate payback? Let us know in the comments. The final chapters explore the long-term impact of the Triumph Foundation and the surprising return of one key character. Don't miss the conclusion of this incredible story. 5 years had passed since the cake incident. 5 years since Robert Sterling was arrested, his trial resulting in a decisive conviction for corporate fraud and public endangerment. He was serving a long sentence in a low-security federal prison, his arrogance replaced by sullen resentment. Meanwhile, the legacy of Elias Vance flourished, not in headlines, but in quiet, transformative work. The Triumph Foundation had become a global leader in ethical reconstruction. Clara Diaz led major legal victories, reclaiming stolen pensions and securing protections for whistleblowers across 3 continents. Manuel Flores, the former forklift operator, now spoke at universities, his life story, from warehouse worker to advocate, inspiring thousands of students to prioritize integrity over greed. Elias, the man at the center of the storm, found his greatest peace in the small, everyday details. He spent his mornings tending a small garden he'd planted with Olivia in the backyard of his modest new home. He was building something organic, something real, far removed from the cold calculus of billions. He had developed a profound relationship with a rescue dog, an elderly, one-eyed Labrador named Justice, a nod to his true goal. Justice was a quiet, constant presence, a living embodiment of the family and animals editorial line, reminding Elias that true loyalty was found outside the boardroom. The biggest change, however, was in Elias's relationship with Olivia. She had completed her degree and now ran the Foundation's international communications desk. She was the one who insisted on moving Manuel's family next door, building a small, vibrant community where support was the primary currency. Elias had achieved more than just revenge. He had cultivated a life rooted in genuine purpose. The memory of the cake was now distant, muted by the success of the Foundation and the simple, everyday happiness of a man who found triumph in anonymity. He had lost an empire, but he had built a legacy that money could never buy. The Triumph Foundation had a strict policy against revenge or gloating. Its success was built on focusing forward, not backward. But the past had a way of resurfacing, often in unexpected and humbling ways. One bleak morning, Clara Diaz brought Elias an unusual request. It came from Robert Sterling's defense attorney, a desperate, last-ditch attempt for clemency based on compassionate grounds. Sterling, always a picture of robust health, had suffered a sudden, severe health crisis in prison. requiring complex and expensive outside care. His family had long since abandoned him, and his remaining funds were seized in the financial collapse. Sterling, the man who laughed at Elias's ruin, was facing a lonely, undignified end. "He's asking for help, Elias," Clara said, clearly conflicted. "He's asking the Triumph Foundation for funding for his medical care." The irony is grotesque. Elias looked at the file, the photograph of a broken, frail Sterling, unrecognizable from the arrogant man who pushed him into the cake. The old rage was gone, replaced by a sense of profound pity. He had stripped Sterling of his power, his wealth, and his dignity, all in the name of justice. But was it justice to leave him to die alone and unsupported? Olivia vehemently opposed the idea. "He showed you no mercy, Dad. Giving him money legitimizes his crimes." "It legitimizes our integrity, Liv," Elias countered gently. "We are not him. Our mission is to support humanity, even the broken parts." Justice was served with the conviction. Compassion is what we owe ourselves. Elias made the decision. He allocated a significant sum from the Foundation's uncommitted funds, anonymously, to cover Sterling's complex medical treatments. The act was a private gesture, one that demonstrated the complete internal victory over the old bitterness. Elias had moved beyond the need for revenge. He had chosen inspiring comeback over bitter closure. The final defeat of Robert Sterling was not his incarceration. It was the kindness shown by the man he tried to destroy. The story of the cake had come full circle, transforming from a public humiliation into a parable about resilience. The Triumph Foundation was hosting a gala, a decidedly non-profit, transparent affair to celebrate 5 years of victories. It was held by design in the same ballroom where Elias was once ruined. Elias was on stage, not giving a triumphal speech, but introducing Manuel Flores. As Manuel spoke, detailing the victories won for everyday heroes, Elias looked out at the audience. It was filled with lawyers, journalists, honest workers, and most importantly, family. Olivia was beaming, and Clara stood proudly by her side. Then a sudden, familiar figure appeared near the back entrance. It was Sarah Vance, Elias's ex-wife. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced by modest attire. She looked older, her face lined with the genuine stress of rebuilding her own life after her firm's scandal. She didn't try to approach the stage or interrupt. She simply stood by the wall, watching Elias and Olivia with a look of distant, quiet respect. She was an uninvited guest again, but this time the reason for her presence was admiration, not malice. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Sarah approached Olivia. "He was right, Liv," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "You chose the right path." Olivia looked at her mother, years of anger dissolving into a quiet acceptance. "He always chose truth, Mom. That's the difference." Elias didn't engage with Sarah, his victory already complete. He looked instead at his dog, Justice, who had curled up contentedly at his feet near the stage, a perfect symbol of the peace he had found. The laughter was gone forever. It had been replaced by the steady, resonant hum of respect and the quiet satisfaction of a life truly rebuilt. Elias Vance had not only revealed his secret plan, but had shown the world that the ultimate triumph is achieved not in the moment of humiliation, but in the long, quiet road of moral recovery. The final acts of the Triumph Foundation, compassion for Robert Sterling and reconciliation with Sarah, prove that Elias's victory was always about integrity, not revenge. Did you expect Elias to show mercy to Sterling? What do you think Sarah's future will look like now? Let us know in the comments. Only 2 chapters left. Chapters 25 and 26 will deliver the final emotional closure to this extraordinary comeback story. Don't miss it. The legal and financial success of the Triumph Foundation was undeniable, yet Elias Vance knew that every great victory carries a true non-monetary cost. He was no longer a billionaire, but he was richer in purpose. However, the years of intense secrecy, fear, and sustained anonymity had left their mark. He carried a certain quietness, a wariness that never fully disappeared. He often visited the site of Project Titan, now under new ethical management appointed by the government and overseen by Clara Diaz. The rusty beams and faulty foundations, the very evidence of Sterling's greed, were being meticulously removed and replaced. It was a physical manifestation of his moral cleanup. One afternoon, Elias stood there watching the workers, honest, dedicated men and women, rebuilding the structure correctly, layer by layer. He saw a young engineer flag a minor material flaw, immediately halt construction, and demand a replacement. No fear, no coercion, just integrity in action. This single small moment observed in silence was the most satisfying reward of his entire plan. He understood that the true cost of the cake incident was not the $500 million, but the 2 years of isolation, the lost time with Olivia, the forced anonymity that had threatened to extinguish his identity. It was a profound lesson in humility. Elias learned more about humanity stocking shelves for minimum wage than he ever did running a global corporation. His quiet demeanor was now understood by his allies. Olivia, Manuel, and Clara didn't treat him as a hero, but as a partner, a fallible, dedicated man who had made the right choice when the world expected him to fail. They were the new family, a family and animals dynamic built on shared values and mutual respect, epitomized by the silent presence of Justice, his loyal Labrador. Always by his side, the laughter from the gala was gone. In its place, Elias now heard the sound of hammers striking true, clean steel, and the quiet, steady rhythm of genuine work. This was the ultimate return on his investment. The ultimate triumph was found not in a stock ticker or a legal document, but on a simple park bench. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, 5 years after the Great Fall. Elias was sitting with Olivia and Manuel, watching Manuel's granddaughter, fully funded by the Triumph Foundation, graduate from law school, inspired fittingly by Clara Diaz. Manuel looked at Elias, his eyes misty with pride and gratitude. "You gave me back my life, Elias. You didn't just win a fight. You created a purpose," Elias smiled. "You gave me back my life, Manuel. You showed me that I didn't need a golden office to find the truth." Olivia leaned against her father, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you lost the $500 million, Dad," she whispered. "The man who had that money wouldn't have built this." Elias thought back to the moment he wiped the cake from his eyes, the laughter ringing in his ears. The humiliation had been excruciating, but it had stripped away everything that was false. The false friends, the false ambition, the false sense of security. It left only the core of his integrity. His $500 million secret plan was never a blueprint for revenge, but a strategy for redemption. The final shocking revelation wasn't the proof of fraud, but the proof that a man can lose everything and, through sheer resilience and integrity, emerge victorious, not by reclaiming the past, but by rebuilding a better future. The story of Elias Vance became a permanent testament to the fact that the most meaningful, inspiring comeback stories are written not by billionaires seeking more wealth, but by everyday heroes demanding simple justice. He had walked the long road from a cream-covered joke to the architect of a noble foundation. The man who was pushed into the cake had revealed his secret plan, a plan to prove that moral truth is the most powerful financial lever in the world. And that truly was the ultimate triumph.